Search for Nancy Guthrie. We do know 3 people were detained. Police activity could be seen 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, and local police and several unmarked vehicles, including forensics and SWAT teams, could be seen gathering.
There are cases that shake a community. There are cases that confuse investigators. And then there are cases that do both simultaneously. Cases where the more you look, the less you seem to understand, until one morning, without warning, everything snaps into focus. The Nancy Guthrie case is exactly that kind of case. And right now, at this very moment, new developments are emerging that are changing the direction of this investigation entirely. Federal agents have returned to the center of this mystery, Nancy Guthrie's home, and what they found this time was not what anyone expected. It was not dramatic in the way crime scenes are portrayed on television. There were no overturned tables, no shattered glass, no visible signs of violence. What investigators encountered was something far more unsettling, a home that looked completely, almost impossibly normal. And in the world of federal investigations, that kind of stillness does not bring comfort. It raises alarm. When the FBI grows quiet, it is never without reason. When agents revisit a location they have already processed, it is never without cause. Something has been uncovered. Something that changes the lens through which every prior piece of evidence must now be re-examined. To understand what that discovery means, we have to go back to the very beginning, to the night Nancy Guthrie was last seen, and to the hours that followed when the world she had built around herself quietly came apart. The evening Nancy Guthrie disappeared began in the most ordinary way imaginable. There was nothing about it that would have made a neighbor glance twice, nothing that would have caused a family member to pause and reconsider. It was the kind of night that fades into memory precisely because nothing seems worth remembering. Dinner was shared. Conversation was warm. The hours passed the way they always did, gently and without friction. People who were with Nancy that evening have consistently described the atmosphere as relaxed. Her mood was steady. She was not distracted or anxious. She did not behave like someone bracing for something, and she did not behave like someone planning to go anywhere. She was simply present, engaged, comfortable, and calm. That description, repeated by multiple people in multiple settings, is one of the details investigators keep returning to. She arrived home before 10 o'clock that night. That much has been confirmed. The identity of who brought her home, however, has not been released. In most missing persons cases, that detail would surface quickly and without hesitation. The fact that it has been deliberately withheld tells investigators, and those paying close attention, that it matters. Details are only protected when they carry weight. The identity of the last known person to see Nancy Guthrie in a normal setting is not a footnote. It may be a cornerstone. Once inside, there were no disturbances. No one heard anything unusual. The neighborhood remained quiet. By the following morning, Nancy was gone. When investigators first entered Nancy Guthrie's home, they were not greeted by chaos. They were greeted by order. Everything appeared to be in its proper place. The doors had not been forced. The windows were intact. There was no furniture displaced, no evidence of struggle, no signs that anything had gone wrong at all. For a case involving a missing person, this was deeply unusual. In most disappearances, the physical environment provides starting point. Broken locks suggest forced entry. Overturned objects suggest confrontation. Missing personal items suggest preparation. The scene at Nancy's home offered none of those traditional starting points. Instead, it offered something more complex and in many ways more troubling, the complete absence of disruption. Investigators are trained to read environments the way others read text. Every home carries the fingerprint of its owner's habits. The way shoes are placed near a door, the state of a kitchen at the end of the evening, whether medication is in its usual spot or moved. These small details collectively paint a picture of what a normal night looks like for that individual. When something deviates from that portrait, even slightly, it registers. And when something is too perfectly aligned with that portrait, when nothing at all is out of place, that also registers because real life is rarely so clean. What agents found in Nancy's home was a scene that looked staged in its normalcy. Not necessarily staged by someone with sinister intent, but staged in the way that a life interrupted mid-breath rarely looks. If Nancy had simply walked out voluntarily, there would likely be signs of that choice. A bag taken, a door left unlocked from the inside, some indication of departure. If she had been taken against her will, there should have been signs of that too. Instead, there was simply stillness. And that stillness became the loudest evidence in the room. Local law enforcement handles thousands of missing persons cases every year. The vast majority are resolved quickly, without ever escalating beyond the county level. When the FBI steps in, particularly in the early stages of an investigation, before significant evidence has been gathered, it signals something specific. It signals that the case has characteristics that extend beyond a local incident. It signals pattern recognition, jurisdictional complexity, or the possibility of organized involvement. In Nancy Guthrie's case, federal involvement came swiftly. That speed is significant. The FBI does not redirect its resources without internal justification. Their early presence meant that someone within the investigative structure had already identified elements in this case that matched broader concerns, elements that suggested this was not an isolated or impulsive event. Federal agents work differently than local investigators in one important respect. They are looking not just at what happened, but at how it was constructed. Local investigations often begin with the immediate, the scene, the timeline, the witnesses. Federal investigations begin earlier, at the behavioral and structural level. Who had access? Who had motive? Who had the patience and knowledge to execute something cleanly? These are not questions born of paranoia. They are questions born of experience with cases where the absence of evidence was itself the most damning clue. The FBI's arrival also changed the information landscape of the case. Updates that had been flowing to the public began to slow. Statements became measured, then sparse, then nearly non-existent. This is a pattern that experienced investigators and journalists both recognize immediately. When the flow of information from a federal investigation narrows, it does not mean the investigation has stalled. It means it has deepened. The silence is not a wall. It is a signal. Investigators cleared Nancy Guthrie's home once. They processed it, documented it, and moved on. That, under normal circumstances, is how it works. The scene is handled once thoroughly, and the evidence gathered is taken into the investigative process. Returning to a cleared scene is not a standard protocol. It happens when something changes. It happens when new information reframes what was already seen, when something that appeared irrelevant at the time of the first visit suddenly becomes critical in the context of what has since been learned. The FBI returned to Nancy's home, and the manner in which they returned is itself instructive. There were no dramatic announcements. No press briefings preceded the visit. No emergency vehicles surrounded the property. Agents arrived quietly and went about their work with the kind of deliberate calm that speaks not to urgency, but to precision. This was not a response to a new crisis. This was a confirmation of a developing theory. When investigators revisit a location in this manner, they are typically doing one of several things. They are verifying measurements or spatial relationships that have become relevant. They are documenting items that were noted initially but not collected, which have since gained significance. They are cross-referencing the physical space against newly gathered digital evidence, checking whether what a device recorded matches what the room physically supports. Or they are looking for something specific that they now know to look for, something that was invisible on the first pass, because they did not yet know what question to ask. What they found this time, the detail that has shifted the entire trajectory of the investigation, has not been released. And that silence, that specific and deliberate withholding, is the clearest indicator yet that the discovery is substantial. Investigators do not protect irrelevant information. They protect information that, if released prematurely, could compromise an active operation, warn a person of interest, or undermine a prosecution that is being carefully constructed. Modern homes are not silent witnesses. Every device within them, every phone, every router, every smart appliance, generates a continuous stream of data that records the rhythms of daily life with absolute indifference to human drama. These systems do not choose what to record. They do not protect anyone. They simply document, timestamp, and store. And in the hands of federal investigators, that data becomes a second narrative running parallel to the one witnesses provide. When investigators returned to Nancy's home, they were not simply re-examining the physical space. They were re-examining the digital architecture of that space. Routers log every device that connects and disconnects, every moment of network activity and silence. Smart devices, thermostats, door sensors, voice-activated assistants record interaction patterns that can reconstruct a timeline with remarkable precision. A door sensor that registers an opening at a specific time. A thermostat that records a temperature change consistent with a door being left ajar. A phone that goes dark at a particular moment and never comes back online. These details do not lie. They cannot be coached or rehearsed. They exist independent of memory, motivation, or narrative. And when they are assembled in sequence, they sometimes tell a story that contradicts the story told by people. That contradiction, the gap between what someone says happened and what the devices recorded happening, is often where federal investigations find their footing. In Nancy's case, investigators have been working to reconstruct the final hours with exactly this kind of digital precision. The goal is not simply to know where she was, but to understand the sequence of decisions, hers and potentially someone else's, that led to her disappearance. Was there communication in the hours before she went missing that indicated planning? Were there patterns of behavior in the days prior that deviated from her norm? Did any device in or near that home record something that, in isolation, meant nothing, but in context means everything? These are the questions that brought investigators back. These are the questions that have kept the case active even as public updates have dried up. In the days following the initial investigation, law enforcement was seen arriving at a relative's home late in the evening. They remained for several hours. No statement was issued. No explanation was offered to the public. The lights were on inside, and deputies moved through the residence methodically and without visible urgency. To an outsider, the scene was ambiguous. To an investigator, it was purposeful. Late-night visits in active investigations are not theatrical. They are not staged to unsettle or intimidate. They happen at night because the work demands it, because the timeline requires it, because the people who need to be spoken with are available, or because the information gathered earlier in the day has opened a door that needs to be walked through before it closes again. The hours do not reflect the emotional temperature of the inquiry. They reflect the operational demands of it. The involvement of a relative's home is also significant in a specific way. Investigators follow information to wherever it leads. If evidence, digital, testimonial, or physical, connects to a specific location or person, that location and person become part of the investigation. That does not imply guilt. It implies relevance. And in a case with as few clean answers as this one, relevance is precious. What was discussed or gathered during that visit has not been disclosed. It may never be fully disclosed to the public. But the visit itself communicates something. The investigation is no longer casting a wide net. It is becoming surgical, is moving from broad inquiry to targeted verification. And that shift from breadth to depth is the hallmark of an investigation that is closing in on something real.